week.
The drug Benlysta from Human Genome Sciences has been on a fast-track review by the FDA. If approved, Benlysta would be the first treatment for lupus in more than 50 years.
Lupus is a chronic disease in which the immune system attacks cells and tissues anywhere in the body. It's estimated 1.5 million Americans suffer from the disease, 90% of them women, primarily of childbearing age. The disease is hard to diagnose since symptoms can be so diverse, affecting the heart, lungs, blood vessels, liver, or nervous system. So it's also been hard to treat.
I have systemic lupus erythematosus, also known as lupus. It has changed my life dramatically. I'm no longer the person that I used to be. I used to be a super mom, working 40 hours a week, keeping my household, and doing everything possible. Now I'm totally disabled, in a wheelchair, and on oxygen.
For decades, lupus patients have been given potent drugs, like steroids. Sometimes the treatments are worse than the symptoms of the disease. A specific treatment for lupus would be a major breakthrough, likely to generate billions in sales. If approved, Benlysta would also be a milestone for biotechnology, a drug resulting from a genomics discovery program.
Last week, an FDA advisory panel voted 13-2 to recommend approval of Benlysta. The agency is scheduled to make a decision early next month. To find out more about this potentially groundbreaking development, we're joined by BioCentury Senior Editor Susan Schaeffer, who's been covering the story, and Sandra Raymond, President of the Lupus Foundation of America. Sandra, I wanted to start with you. The last time the lupus drug was approved, the president was Eisenhower, was in the White House.
That's right.
Can you describe a little bit what lupus is, why it's such a devastating disease, and also why it's been so hard to develop therapies for it?
Well, Steve, you know our immune system is a very wonderful, delicate system, and usually in balance, it protects us against the bacteria and viruses that attack our body. In lupus, the immune system goes out of balance, and autoantibodies are formed, and autoantibodies attack the self. So they begin to attack normal, healthy tissue and organs. So lupus is a devastating disease that can affect any organ system in the body.
The kind of symptoms that people suffer with it?
There are many. Breathing problems, for example, extreme fatigue. I'm not talking about being tired. I'm talking about extreme fatigue. Tremendous headaches, hair falling out, rashes, sore joints and stiff joints. There are all kinds of symptoms that come along with lupus.
So Susan, you were at the advisory committee meeting last week. As I said in the introduction, they voted 13-2 to recommend approval, but there's always more to these meetings than just what the vote is. What was your kind of take-home message from the meeting?
Sure. Well, the vote was overwhelmingly in favor of approval. As you said, it was 13-2. And I think, the panelists really were noting the great need for therapies in this indication. They acknowledged that Benlysta is not a perfect drug. The efficacy may be fairly mild, but as one of the panelists said, in this indication, even a mild drug is necessary. They also raised a lot of questions. There was a lot of healthy debate about the clinical trial program, how certain things were handled, like the use of concomitant medications, because of course these patients couldn't be taken off the steroids
and taking, yeah.
Exactly.
So what was your impression from it, Sandra?
Well, I too listened very carefully about some of the issues regarding the clinical trial. I think it's notoriously difficult to do clinical trials in lupus. First of all, these patients are on very potent medications. They're taking high doses of steroid, they're taking antimalarials like Plaquenil, and they may be taking a combination of other off-label drugs. So it's very, very difficult to show a benefit of an investigational drug over the background medications. And I think in the future, to reach statistical significance in a trial, you're going to see that narrow window. It's not a slam dunk,
Right.
It really isn't a slam dunk. or a miracle cure, but it will help some people, and that's very valuable.
Yeah, so that's what I was going to get at. It's not the cure for lupus, right?
Absolutely right.
You know,
it's not.
is your sense then that there is going to be someday a cure, or is it going to be really a matter of getting a whole bunch of different drugs to deal with the different kinds of symptoms and different stages of the disease?
Well, I think like most diseases, we don't have cures for many diseases in this country. We bring disease under control. It's my hope that in the future, research increases so that we find out more about the causes of the disease and design targeted drugs to treat the disease. And I think if that would occur, lupus patients would be extremely happy.
Mm-hmm.
And sure, and one of the things to point out too, we need many drugs for this disease because patients respond very differently to different drugs. What works in one person is not going to work in another.
That's right.
What produces toxicities in one patient isn't going to in another. And you can't know until you try.
So the interesting thing is that there hasn't been anything approved for a long time for lupus, but there are a lot of drugs in the pipeline. I looked in BioCentury's database, and there are a couple dozen companies that are working on drugs, and more than a dozen that have drugs that are in the clinic. What are they going to get out of last week's advisory committee meeting? Does it create some kind of a roadmap for new drugs to get developed?
Well, it's interesting. I think that the trials that Human Genome Sciences ran were quite novel. They used an endpoint that had never been used before that combined some standard instruments for evaluating lupus signs and symptoms in a new way. There were a lot of questions about how that instrument was used, but in the end the panelists voted that the drug should be approved, and you know, really they all said it was remarkable that given how difficult this disease has been, that any drug was able to demonstrate efficacy with statistical significance.
Sandra, the Lupus Foundation has got some efforts to kind of promote research and to try to create a better pathway for getting new drugs approved.
Absolutely.
Quickly, can you describe some of the things that you're doing and you think need to be done?
Well, we have several projects that are really interesting. The first project is called the Collective Data Analysis Initiative. And that is an initiative to mine the data from all the past failed trials.
And there have been many.
And there have been many. And we want to gather that data, and we're going to analyze that data. We've hired a biostatistician who is looking at all the parameters in these failed trials, all of these patients who are now in the placebo group. And this is going to probably foretell, are there any trends, for example, in the placebo group? Mm-hmm. We're going to go on and we're going to publish that information. So we're going to populate the literature with new information about lupus. That's one program that we're doing. The second one is taking these instruments, Susan, that you've talked about, and standardizing the way in which clinical investigators use them. Mm-hmm. So we now have an online service to all clinical investigators around the world.
So you're basically trying to create a level
standardize the use and the training on these instruments.
Well, it sounds like there's at least some hope for progress going forward. Thanks very much, Susan Schaeffer, for covering the story and talking to us about it, and Sandra Raymond.